Imagine this. You find yourself alone in a room that is as silent as the void between stars. No music hums through the air, no ticking clock punctuates the stillness, not even the faint rush of a distant city or whisper of the wind. The silence is absolute, a presence so thick it presses down on your skin, settles in your bones, and unsettles your breath. In this void, you sit. No distractions, no stimuli, no escape from yourself. Yet paradoxically, this very act, sitting alone in silence, is often feared, avoided, or dismissed in a world that celebrates noise, distraction, and ceaseless motion. You might wonder how sitting still, doing seemingly nothing, could wield hidden power. How could the absence of sound, the empty space between thoughts, be anything but a dull void? In fact, does silence signify emptiness or abundance? Is this profound quiet a danger or a sanctuary? Most people recoil from silence because it reveals what is buried beneath the surface. The swirling chaos of thoughts, the ache of unresolved feelings, the raw contours of your inner reality stripped of distraction's comforting fog. To sit alone in silence is to stare unflinchingly at something that modern life has taught us to avoid, our own mind untamed, our own soul unshielded. It is both a confrontation and an invitation, terrifying and irresistible. How often do you allow yourself to be truly alone with your thoughts? How long could you endure the absence of noise before your own mind becomes the loudest sound you hear? And more importantly, what might emerge in you during those moments? If not panic, if not restlessness, then what? Imagine for a moment that silence is not a void but a mirror. In it, you do not just vanish, you become visible in sharper relief. Every unresolved desire, fear, hope, and regret imprints itself on that reflective surface. The paradox is that the loud clatter of everyday life often mutes these truths, while silence amplifies them. It's as if the world spends relentless energy blaring, so you won't have to confront the whisper of your own being. But what if silence itself holds a coded power, something primal and transformative, waiting to awaken inside you? Something that can only be accessed by sitting alone, with nothing but the quiet as company. The ancient mystics, philosophers, and psychologists have long pointed toward this hidden territory, a strange crucible where the self is both dismantled and reborn, where the noise falls away. And what is left is a raw, unfiltered presence. Yet the modern mind balks at this. We live in an era addicted to noise, the endless scroll of screens, the background chatter of conversations, the constant influx of information competing to claim our attention. In this ceaseless flood, silence is mistaken for emptiness or loss. The stillness that once held sacred insight now threatens boredom or madness. But silence is neither blank nor empty. It is the soil in which something essential can grow. Can you feel the tension here? Between the terror of your own mind and the promise that lies beyond it. Between the compulsion to fill every moment and the courage to sit still. Between avoidance and encounter, between distraction and revelation. This tension is not a mere inconvenience but the very heartbeat of your inner life, thrumming beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged with. Radical honesty. You might ask, why is it so difficult to embrace this silence? Why does sitting alone without distraction feel unnatural, even dangerous? The answer is buried in the subtle ways your psyche has been trained to avoid itself, to run from its own depths, to cover over the stillness with noise. Sitting alone in silence threatens to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of distraction and performance that props up your everyday self. What will happen when the mask falls away and you are left alone with your unvarnished self? But what lies beyond that threshold? Is it despair or discovery, madness or meaning? The answers are not etched in any book or whispered in any lecture. They must be felt, lived, and experienced. And that journey begins precisely in the act you might least expect, the quiet surrender of sitting alone, fully silent, with nothing but your own presence. The paradox deepens. This seemingly passive, inert act is not passive at all. It is an act of immense courage, a radical form of self-engagement that challenges your assumptions about presence and absence, doing and being, noise and soundlessness. In that space, the hidden power begins to unfold, though you may not yet see it. So what exactly transforms when you sit in that silence? What shifts in the tension between your mind's chatter and the quiet expanse? How does this paradox resonate with the deeper layers of your psyche, those shadowed, unexplored parts Carl Jung so often invited us to meet with fearless curiosity? These questions hover, suspended in the silence you now inhabit with me. They pull you forward, out of avoidance and into encounter, out of noise and into stillness. To unravel this riddle, to glimpse the hidden power, you must lean into the discomfort, push past the urge to flee, and recognize that sitting alone in silence is not a void but a crucible, where the noise ends and something else begins. The road ahead is uneasy, profound, and uncharted. But it is here, in this intersection of fear and possibility, that the hidden power of silence waits patiently to be discovered. And once you understand its gravity, its necessity, you will never again seek to fill the silence with anything but the depth of your own attention. The next step, then, is not to ask, why sit alone in silence? But to begin to see what sitting alone allows you to become, and what it quietly demands you to face. How does this silent act begin to transform the restless mind and fractured self? How does it challenge the very foundations of who you think you are? These questions call us deeper still. You might wonder then, why it is that this most natural state, being alone, in silence, feels so alien, even threatening. Why does the mind scream for distraction the moment sound recedes? Why does society clamor for noise, for endless activity, as if silence were a contagion to be avoided? These are not random questions, but symptoms of a cultural and psychological malaise rooted deep in the soil of human consciousness. Carl Jung, who stands like a towering sentinel over the landscape of the psyche, saw this predicament with uncanny clarity. To Jung, the human mind is not merely a rational machine but a layered realm, where consciousness scrapes only the surface. Below lies the unconscious, a vast, dark sea filled with archetypes, shadows, and buried truths. Sitting alone in silence is not some passive retreat but a deliberate plunge into this murky domain. It forces the ego, the conscious self you cling to, into a confrontation with what it hides or denies. This is no trivial exercise. It is the essential journey toward wholeness. Yet the ego resists fiercely, because to face those shadows is to question the very fabric of identity. Such resistance is symptomatic of a modern epidemic. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his relentless critique of modernity, might say that we live in an age of nihilism, where meaning has eroded beneath the weight of relentless progress and superficial distraction. When you sit alone, stripped of the usual diversions, your phone, conversation, background noise, you encounter the void Nietzsche warned about, an abyss staring back at you where the usual scaffolding of values and purpose has crumbled. Silence, then, is an unwelcome mirror reflecting the emptiness we've tried so desperately to avoid. Why do we flee this mirror? Arthur Schopenhauer offers a bleak but illuminating perspective. He believed that human suffering is a constant and that the will, an insatiable blind force driving desire, is never satisfied. Noise and distraction become a barricade against the painful restlessness at life's core. To sit in silence is to cease fleeing, to confront the restless will on its own turf. This confrontation, Schopenhauer argued, is terrifying precisely because it reveals the futility of endless striving. Escape feels impossible. Everything you thought would fill the void falls away, revealing a silence deeper than any outside noise. But the silence also holds another, more elusive truth that philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre brought into focus: the paradox of freedom. Sartre described human consciousness as a being for itself, a complex entity defined by its capacity for self-reflection and choice. Yet this freedom is a kind of abyss, an unbearable weight. When left alone without distractions, the sheer responsibility of existing, of choosing meaning and defining oneself, presses down like an invisible agony. Silence brooks no excuses. It demands that you face yourself without the masquerade of social roles, achievements, or noise. It exposes the fragility of identity built on external validation and leaves you naked with your freedom and its attendant anguish. This leads us inevitably to Viktor Frankl, who wrestled not only with the abyss of silence, but with the meaning found within it. His experience in concentration camps distilled the painful clarity that even in absolute isolation, in silence stripped of all external stimuli, human beings hold the power to find purpose. Frankl's logotherapy proposes that meaning is not given but created, especially in suffering and solitude. The silence you resist is not a void but a canvas, an empty field where you can plant meaning if only you dare to till the soil of your inner world. Yet, this demands courage few possess in abundance. Aldous Huxley cautioned about the modern world's insidious addiction to diversion as a form of spiritual anesthesia. The constant stimulation we seek from media, technology, and endless activity anesthetizes us against the deeper pains and questions that arise in silence. We drown the unsettling question, who am I, really, under a flood of superficiality, advertising, and noise. The hidden power of sitting alone threatens the dominant order of distraction precisely because it invites you back into your being, away from the external stories and compulsions imposed upon you. All these thinkers frame the same paradox. Silence is both a terrifying abyss and a wellspring of profound transformation. It is both a threat to identity and a crucible through which identity can be reborn. Society's relentless noise is not merely background. It is a fortress built to keep you from the disquieting invitation held in silence. The restless mind's chatter is not random. It is a desperate defense against falling into the mire of the unformed self. How does this hidden force manifest in everyday life? Perhaps you notice it in the relentless scroll through your phone, the nervous twitch whenever moments stretch into stillness, the avoidance of solitude with a ferocity that feels almost instinctual. These are not mere habits, but symptoms of a psyche that has been denied a necessary encounter. They are the outward expressions of an inner war, between the ego's demand for safety and distraction, and the unconscious's beckoning toward wholeness through silence. But here lies another tension. Ignore this call long enough, and the silence will begin to work in ways you do not foresee. The repressed shadows, the denied questions, the unacknowledged fears fester in the absence of conscious integration. Jung warned of the shadow, those parts of ourselves we refuse to see, which do not disappear when ignored but grow stronger, erupting unexpectedly in dreams, anxieties, and destructive behaviors. Silence forces these shadows toward the light, offering an opportunity for integration. But refusal means these dark fragments will fracture your psyche in subtle, corrosive ways. Thus, the hidden power of sitting alone in silence is not merely about peace or relaxation. It is a battleground where the deepest forces shaping your emotional life, behavior, and identity collide. To sit in silence is to step into an arena where the psyche's myths, fears, and desires reveal themselves with brutal honesty. The mind's relentless noise is a desperate defense against this revelation. Yet, paradoxically, it is only by entering this silence that you can begin to dismantle those defenses and reclaim a more authentic self. The consequences of avoiding this encounter are profound. Without this reckoning, the fracturing you sense, a pervasive restlessness, a haunting sense of meaninglessness, and emotional volatility, intensifies. The self becomes a collage of fragmented roles and personas, each struggling for dominance but none capable of sustaining true coherence. Your behavior mirrors this inner dissonance. Compulsions, addictions, distractions all vie to mask the void. The emotions you experience shift like storm clouds, unpredictable and overwhelming. What you have long sought outside, validation, pleasure, achievement, becomes increasingly hollow. Yet the noise and activity continue, a frantic symphony orchestrated to drown out the silence that waits patiently beneath it all. The question now emerges with greater urgency. What will you do when the noise no longer suffices? When the distractions lose their power to anesthetize? When the hidden force beneath the surface makes itself felt so keenly that silence is no longer avoidable? The answer is veiled still, but the path forward begins with one simple, terrifying act: to sit alone in silence and meet the hidden power on its own terms. This is where the next transformation awaits, a passage through vulnerability into depth, from fragmentation to wholeness. But before you can cross this threshold, you must first understand what this silence asks of you and what it threatens to undo. The descent into silence is not a retreat, but a confrontation with the forces that shape your being. It is a journey as old as humanity, echoed in the writings of ancient mystics and modern psychologists alike. Yet it is uniquely urgent now, in an age where noise has become the armor that shields us from the tremors within. You stand at a crossroads, caught between the compulsion to flee and the dread of return. The hidden power of silence waits patiently, not as a gentle friend, but as an uncompromising teacher who demands everything you are willing to surrender. To understand it, to harness it, is to begin the process of becoming more than the noise, more than the personas, more than the restless mind. But this revelation does not come easily. It demands a reckoning with the shadows and with the terrifying freedom that silence alone reveals. It demands stepping into the abyss Nietzsche described, not to fall, but to find footing in the depths where meaning and identity are forged anew. And so the tension builds, tightening like a coil, drawing you deeper into a mystery that will not be silenced. What happens when you finally stop running? When you finally listen? What becomes possible when the noise fades and the silence speaks? The answers lie just beyond the threshold you now face, beyond fear, beyond avoidance, within the hidden power that sits quietly, waiting. You might believe you are the master of your thoughts, the captain steering your mind ship through the storm of existence. Yet beneath this assumption lies a subtle deceit, one so profound it shapes not only your private world but the very structure of society itself. This unseen force is not some external tyrant but a quiet architect within you. The ceaseless chatter, the relentless noise that fills the intervals between moments, the habitual avoidance of silence. It is the background hum of cognitive bias, neurological wiring, and cultural conditioning that sculpts your reality without your consent. Consider this: your brain is wired not for stillness but for survival. Evolution etched its survival algorithms deep into the folds of your cortex, prioritizing motion, distraction, and reaction. The reticular activating system, the gatekeeper of your attention, pulls you toward stimuli with an almost desperate urgency. Every ping from your phone, every flicker of social media, every invasive impulse fragments your focus and reinforces a pattern. This is not mere happenstance. It is the biological foundation of the noise you so desperately try to drown out but never quite escape. Your mind manufactures stories, spinning webs of narrative to make sense of fragmented experience. Yet cognitive biases hijack these narratives in ways you rarely perceive. Anchoring bias, confirmation bias, availability heuristic, they act as silent puppeteers, nudging you toward interpretations that reinforce your existing beliefs and fears. Your psyche becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting illusions under the guise of truth. And within this echo chamber, silence feels like a threat. To sit alone without external distraction is to confront the glaring inconsistencies and contradictions that bias conceals. The dissonance unsettles the fragile equilibrium you've built. What if the noise is not only a distraction but a fortress, one you've built around yourself to shield from unbearable truths? This fortress is reinforced by cultural conditioning. From childhood, you are taught to fear silence as much as solitude. In many societies, silence is equated with weakness, boredom, or even danger. The cultural narrative insists that productivity, entertainment, and constant connection are virtues. To linger in silence is anathema, a rebellion against a worldview that demands ceaseless doing and superficial being. This cultural consensus manufactures a collective noise, muting the individual's capacity for deep reflection. But what if this collective noise is complicit in a far greater deception? The social realities we inhabit, the frenetic pace of urban life, the endless scroll of information, the performative nature of social interaction, are all symptoms of this unseen trap. The illusion of control you believe you possess slips through your fingers because your mind is overwhelmed, overstimulated, and outmaneuvered by forces it cannot see. Each moment spent avoiding silence is a moment lost to the slow corrosion of clarity, purpose, and authenticity. Neurologically, the brain craves novelty and avoids monotony, not because stillness is inherently threatening, but because your neural pathways have been conditioned to expect a constant barrage of input. The dopamine cycles that reward distraction become addictive. You learn to associate silence with emptiness rather than recharge. This rewiring creates a feedback loop where silence triggers unease, restlessness, and even anxiety. You don't just avoid silence, you fear it. Scientific studies reveal that when confronted with silence, many individuals experience discomfort that rivals physical pain. Your brain interprets silence as a void, a potential threat to your identity and stability. The paradox here is devastating. In your desperate escape from silence, you imprison yourself within endless noise, which then distorts your perception of the world and yourself. The more you run, the more you lose touch with the very essence of being. The dividing walls between your inner self and external reality grow thicker, built on layers of distraction and denial. You become a spectator in your own life, anesthetized by the noise, unable to hear the subtle truths whispering beneath the cacophony. And yet, this trap is not merely a personal prison, it is a societal condition. Collective denial and distraction give rise to a culture of superficiality, where meaning is diluted and depth is suspect. When silence is feared on the individual level, society loses the capacity for genuine dialogue and introspection. Public discourse devolves into noise, sound bites, slogans, and sensationalism, precisely because no one has learned to tolerate the discomfort silence reveals. This leads to fragmentation, polarization, and a pervasive sense of alienation. You might think this is an exaggeration. How can silence wield such power over society? But pause and consider. Every mass movement, every wave of collective anxiety, every surge of discontent finds fertile ground in this silence-averse landscape. Without the grounding force of introspection, societies latch onto external distractions or divisive narratives to fill the void. The absence of silence is the absence of space for meaning to emerge. Without silence, truth becomes malleable, identity becomes fragmented, and consciousness becomes a battlefield for competing noises. The urgency to escape is not merely about finding peace in solitude. It is about reclaiming your agency from the architecture of distraction that invisibly governs your choices, your thoughts, even your sense of self. This is no trivial matter. The more entrenched your mind becomes in noise, the harder it is to disentangle from the biases and conditioning that distort your reality. You may feel trapped within a relentless storm, believing that silence is a faraway sanctuary. But the truth is that the sanctuary lies within, accessible only by a courageous step into what you have long feared. Can you sense the weight of the invisible chains tightening around you? Each unexamined moment of noise further deepens the shadow cast over your consciousness. Listening to silence is not about comfort. It is an existential confrontation. It demands a radical vulnerability that most avoid. But retreating into noise offers only temporary reprieve. The unresolved tension festers beneath the surface, shaping your decisions, your relationships, your very worldview. The crucial realization inches nearer, that the struggle to sit in silence is not a mere personal quirk, but a profound psychological and cultural battleground. Here, in this contested interior landscape, lies the source of your discontent and the seed of transformation alike. Yet you stand at the precipice, still hesitant, still uncertain whether to leap into the unknown or return to the familiar noise. What if, just what if, the power of sitting alone in silence is precisely the power to dismantle these hidden biases and conditioning from their roots? What if silence, in all its daunting emptiness, is the only space where your authentic self can emerge unmasked, unmanipulated, and sovereign? Not a respite from life's chaos, but the very source from which clarity and freedom spring. This is the silent revolution beckoning you, one that unfolds not in grand gestures but in the small, unremarkable moments when you choose to remain still. There is urgency here, a quiet but relentless momentum pulling you beyond the trap, a momentum that will reveal itself only when you are willing to embrace the discomfort of your own unmediated presence. And so the unseen trap tightens, but so does the invitation to transcend the noise, to dismantle the scaffolding of distraction, and to discover what lies beneath the restless surface of your mind. The journey is perilous, wounding even, but it is also the threshold of a breakthrough that none but silence can deliver. You have been taught to fear silence, as if it were a void ready to swallow you whole, a desert wasteland where all meaning evaporates. From earliest moments, every pause threatens the unbearable weight of your own mind unleashed, wild and unruly. And yet, what if this fear is not a symptom, but the very point of your captivity? What if the terror of sitting alone with yourself is the last guard at the gates of profound freedom? This is not a trivial guess, but a radical reversal that demands everything you thought you knew to be reconsidered. The world around you has conditioned you to believe that silence is absence, emptiness, nothingness. But what if silence is instead the most potent presence? More than the absence of noise, silence is the presence of undiluted consciousness. To sit in silence alone is not to disappear into nothing, but to emerge into a dimension where the tyranny of external narrative falls away, leaving only you, raw and unmediated, facing the core of your own existence. Here lies the secret that history's greatest minds and mystics have uncovered time and time again. Yet, it remains hidden beneath layers of distraction, denial, and fear. Consider the Stoics, those ancient architects of inner resilience, who retreated into solitude not to escape life's trials, but to confront the turmoil within and reforge the self. Marcus Aurelius scribbled meditations in the quiet hours, not to fill a void, but to illuminate the silent altar where truth could be worshipped without interruption. Or look to the ascetics and sages of the East, who sat in meditation alone for decades, dismantling the self not to erase identity, but to reveal boundless freedom beyond it. They did not flee life. They unraveled the false self imposed by society and the mind's ceaseless chatter. Their silence was a rebellion, a radical act of reclaiming control from the chains of conditioned thought. The stories of these figures are not ancient relics for quiet scholars. They are not anecdotes from a disconnected past. They are living blueprints for your own revolution. What they understood, and what you must grasp, is that silence is not a passive state but a battlefield, a laboratory of transformation. The silence that terrifies you is also the silence that liberates you. In that stillness, the cacophony of your fears, anxieties, and illusions begins to unravel, thread by thread. This leads to the first counterintuitive breakthrough. The more you resist silence, the more you empower the very noise you wish to escape. It is your resistance, your frantic need to fill each moment with distraction, stimulation, or mental chatter, that fuels the chaos inside. You might believe that distraction shields you from discomfort, but in doing so, you hand over your sovereignty to the forces that manipulate and fragment your attention. Silence, paradoxically, is not the enemy but the cure, not the absence of life, but the presence of your most vital life force. Yet embracing silence is not to endure a tranquil void, but to cultivate an active, vigilant witnessing, the kind of presence that does not judge, does not flee, but stands firm as life's raw sensations and thoughts arise and dissolve. This witnessing is a radical shift beyond mere relaxation or stress relief. It is the dismantling of habitual patterns that enslave you, patterns of judgment, craving, avoidance, that have kept you trapped in a reactive loop. The deeper you sit in silence, the more these patterns lose their grip, revealing the vast ground beneath where freedom dwells. Imagine reclaiming the reins of your mind in this way, not by controlling every thought or silencing every worry, but by learning to observe them as passing clouds, untethered from your true self. This detachment is not denial, it is mastery. It is the ability to choose your response rather than be dragged by impulse or habit. It is the power to cultivate clarity amid chaos and courage amid fear. And it all begins with your willingness to face silence without running. This transformation turns the familiar paradigm inside out. Power is not found in endless doing or consuming, but in deliberate being. The modern myth of productivity that binds you to constant noise and distraction is unmasked as a prison designed to keep you dependent, fragmented, and unaware. Sitting alone in silence is the radical act that shatters this myth. By withdrawing from the compulsive noise, you reclaim a subterranean current of strength, a power that no external achievement could ever touch. Look to those who have forged this path before you and witnessed its fruits. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious, emphasized the necessity of solitude and silence for psychological wholeness. He knew well that the unconscious does not speak in noise but in symbols, silence, and the stillness between thoughts. His lifelong journey into the self revealed that the discomfort of silence is a threshold, painful, yes, but fertile. Within that silence, the psyche's hidden wisdom surfaces, guiding you to a profound integration of shadow and light, chaos and order. Jung's insights compel you to see sitting alone in silence not as a retreat, but as an advance, a bold step into the uncharted terrain of your own psyche. It requires courage to meet the unknown within, but it also promises a formidable reward: the rediscovery of your inner sovereignty, the reclaiming of a mind that is your servant rather than your tyrant. This is your invitation to a revolution, so quiet it mocks the clamor of the external world, but so deep it shakes the foundations of your identity. To sit alone in silence is to rewrite your story, not as a passive character buffeted by circumstance, but as an active creator wielding the power of presence. It is a reclamation of authority over your inner domain, a building of a new architecture of consciousness that honors complexity, ambiguity, and the profound mystery of being. Are you ready to unlearn the fear of silence, to step beyond the false safety of distraction and into a power that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface? The path is not easy. It demands patience, bravery, and an openness to encounter whatever stirs in the depths. But the prize is a radical new way of thinking and living that no external force can ever take away. You stand at the threshold now, armed with a new understanding. That silence is not your enemy but your greatest ally. And in that alliance lies the hidden power to break free from the psychological chains that have held you captive, to build a life shaped not by reactive noise but by deliberate clarity and profound resilience. What will you choose to do with this power? Will you embrace the silence or retreat once again into the familiar chaos? The revolution begins in the stillness, and it begins with you. You have sat in that stillness long enough now to begin sensing the tremors beneath your own skin, not the frantic beat of adrenaline, but a quieter pulse, the subtle rhythm of existence itself. What if all this noise, the relentless rush and obligation, the swirl of thoughts and regrets, is merely a veil obscuring something far more profound? not a destination to reach or a triumph to seize, but an unveiling, a gradual peeling away of layers that reveal the naked, trembling truth of who you really are beyond the masks you wear. Here is the paradox that silence reveals. Your identity, the self you clutch with desperate fingers, is both a fortress and a mirage. Within the sanctuary of solitude, those walls seem to dissolve, exposing the vast, uncharted landscape of your inner world, wild and untamed. And suddenly, the struggle you have known, the anxiety, the restlessness, the aching need to be seen, becomes a riddle with a hidden key. For in embracing silence, you discover that the self you have fought to control is itself a construct, a shifting shadow made of thoughts, fears, and stories told to you by others and yourself. You realize that these are not your chains but mere echoes, and the silence allows you to step beyond their reach. This is the deepest revelation. Reality is not a fixed stage on which you play predetermined roles, but a fluid mirror reflecting your own judgments back at you. Your inner dialogue, those relentless narrations, are not facts but interpretations, fragile threads you can choose to weave or unweave. In silence, you learn to witness this with detachment, to see the cacophony of your mind as a passing storm rather than a permanent condition. This shift is revolutionary because it grants you sovereignty over your experience. You begin to inhabit a space where you are no longer victim or prisoner but observer and creator. Imagine then that every struggle you have endured, every moment of despair and confusion, was not a sign of weakness but an invitation, a doorway into this immense freedom. The pain you felt when trapped in chaos was the pressure that fractured the old illusions, the pressure that made room for this profound awakening. What seemed like suffering is now reframed as a sacred process of metamorphosis. You see with new eyes. The storms of your mind were never the enemy, but the midwives of your rebirth. The silence, once feared as emptiness, emerges as the fertile soil where the seeds of true wisdom take root. It is not a blank void, but a vibrant darkness, charged with potential, awash with a profound aliveness that cannot be measured or tamed. Sitting alone in silence does not erase the world, but reveals its subtle orchestration, the dance of light and shadow within and without. You begin to feel a kinship with the vastness, the eternal stillness that underlies all forms and narratives. And here comes the poetic truth, the cinematic image that lingers long after the moment passes. You are not the noise. You are not the storm. You are the silent sky beneath it all, vast, patient, unshakable. This sky does not resist the clouds, it holds them, knows their passing, and remains untouched. From this vantage point, the meaning of your existence unfolds like dawn, slow, radiant, inescapable. Now, as the echoes of this realization settle into the core of your being, you face the choice that has always been yours: to continue fleeing into distraction, chasing phantoms of certainty outside yourself, or to anchor in this silence, this profound stillness where the true power lies. This power is neither external accolade nor fleeting pleasure, but a radical freedom, the freedom to be fully present, fully alive, utterly authentic in a world that demands otherwise. So ask yourself, with the weight of everything you have uncovered, how will you inhabit this moment forward? Will you carry the armor of noise and distraction, or will you step barefoot into the quiet wilderness of your soul and claim the sovereignty that silence offers? Will you allow this stillness to dismantle your old narratives, to shatter the illusions of control and certainty, and to reveal the raw, unfiltered essence of your being? In that sacred silence, listen closely. Beyond the thoughts, beyond the fears, there lies a pulse, a humble, tireless heartbeat that is yours and yet transcends you. It whispers of a truth too vast to grasp but impossible to ignore, that your life is not a puzzle to be solved but a mystery to be lived, that your presence here in this moment is the most radical act of all. You are both the question and the answer, the shadow and the light, the silence and the sound. The horizon stretches infinitely before you, inviting you to step beyond the known into the wild grace of being. This is not an end but a beginning, the beginning of a journey where silence is your companion, your guide, your most powerful ally. Embrace it. Let it haunt you, transform you, and awaken you. For in the quiet depths of sitting alone in silence, you find not solitude, but the whole universe reflected back at you, shimmering with the endless possibility of becoming truly free.